I have the pleasure of introducing people who need no introduction, so we're not going to waste a lot of time, and we're going to get right into the session. We, of course, as I said earlier, and I'm Percy Down, one of the 3 vice chairs of the Parliamentary Network. Our president, unfortunately, could not be here. We hope to have him join us later on the screen from London. He's a member of the House of Commons, and we all know the troubles that are happening and unfolding there. So Jeremy could not be here in person, but we anticipate hearing from him. I'll start the session right away with Madame Lafarge from, if you would like to come to the podium and say a few words, and then we'll have our second speaker, and then we'll go to questions. I will propose we do 2 or 3 questions at a time, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Those that we don't cover off, you can send us by email or speak to us later, and we'll get answers for you at the conclusion of the sessions today. Thank you, Madame.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Percy, if I may call you that way? Thank you. And we are very, very sad and sorry that Jeremy is not with us, but terribly happy that you are here. We're sad and sorry that Jeremy is not with us because he's clearly doing some important things, but what is more important than being in this room this morning, frankly? Maybe Brexit, maybe. Yeah, well. All right, so we're delighted to be with you yet again. And as you know, at the IMF, just as at the bank, I'm sure, we value very highly the dialogue that we have with parliamentarians, whether we have it on the occasion of this particular meeting or whether we have it whenever, certainly when I visit countries, and if the members of parliament, members of whichever chamber, wish to have a moment, whether it is at the commission levels or whether it is at plenary level, we try to make time and certainly have that continued dialogue with your colleagues on the ground. And I think it's a particularly important relationship to have. It is so in relation to both the surveillance and the policy advice that we give, but it's obviously so when we have programs in place with countries so that we can explain the purpose of the partnership that we have with countries. What I would like to do very briefly, because it's far more interesting when you ask questions and because you have your own particular topics of interest, I would like to spend a few minutes on the outlook, which is how we see the global economy at this juncture. Second, say a few words about the Sustainable Development Goals and the very small angle that we can take and where we can support the action of institutions like our sister across the street, the World Bank, which is where we are at the moment. And I would like to say just a few words about women, because this is, as you know, a topic that is very important to us and that I hold very highly in my list of priorities, and on which our staff will also report back to you later on. So, for those of you who are interested in economic affairs, you might have heard a couple of words that are being used in conjunction or in succession. The first one is, as opposed to the time when I said that as the sun is shining, it's time to fix the roof, which was a year ago, still using the weather analogy, I have used the unsettled weather. Because 6 months ago, I referred to the clouds on the horizon and the fact that it was still time to fix the roof. We're now saying that the weather is unsettled and that it is still time to take all the appropriate measures. But, and that's the second thing that you might have heard, is anybody having a hard time sitting down, finding a seat or taking photos? Tout va bien? Good. Now, it's the photograph experts who are making a big fuss. Oh, come on. So, we are saying that it is a delicate moment. Delicate in that we have seen growth slowing down a little bit, and we are quite concerned because what we are seeing at the moment is this synchronized slowdown, as opposed to the synchronized acceleration of growth that we had a year ago. So while a year ago we had 75% of the global economy accelerating the momentum towards more growth, now we have 70% of the global economy on a slowdown path. And that is why we're saying that it's a delicate moment where nobody can afford a policy misstep. Now, am I going to recommend, a set of policies that would be working for all countries? Obviously not, because countries are each in a different position. Whether they are developing, emerging, or advanced, it's a different picture, number one. Whether they have fiscal space or no fiscal space, a rising debt or a stabilized debt is going to predict a different recommendation. Whether they have already conducted some structural reforms or are about to consider them is going to predict again a different recommendations. And as far as monetary policies, obviously things will depend on whether or not, well, it will depend obviously on the kind of monetary policy that the countries follow, but it's also going to depend on whether or not they have anchored inflation and what is the level of growth that is expected. But it's a delicate moment because you want both to stabilize and eventually reduce debt, of which we have way too much around the world at the moment. Yet you don't want to hamper and put a brake on growth. And at the same time, you need to conduct those structural reforms that will address the issues of inequality, of insufficient productivity around the world, and address more long-term issues such as climate change that are urgent today. So that's pretty much where we are at the moment. And if you ask me, what is the expectation 6 months from today? There might be a case where actually growth picks up, because monetary policy, particularly here in the United States, but also in Europe, in the UK, and to a certain extent in Japan, monetary policy is not tightening, quite to the contrary, and we are receiving indications that the heads of those monetary institutions are going to stay accommodating for a longer period of time. So we might have a pickup in the second half of 2019 and early 2020. However, there are downside risks, and you would include in those, first and foremost, are the tensions on the trade front, which have begun producing an impact on growth in general. Numbers released by the WTO a few days ago attest to that. We also have geopolitical developments that are country related. Assume for a second that Jeremy and his colleagues, together with other UK authorities, do not reach satisfactory conclusion and we have some sort of hard Brexit at the end of the day. That would certainly have a detrimental impact not only on the UK and on the EU, but also on a global basis. So those are examples of downside risks that we have on the horizons, as would have, for instance, a slower pace of growth in China. We're not seeing it at the moment because clearly China has decided to stimulate quite a bit, and it doesn't seem to be in the cards, but things can happen. Just in the same way, there could be financial markets surprises coming up. We're not seeing any recession in the immediate term, but we have to be very guarded against that. So that's as we see the global outlook at the moment. Very quickly on the Sustainable Development Goals, just to share with you work that we have done that indicates that if only we are to take 5 of the key Sustainable Development Goals, and we have done that fiscal exercise and the modelization that goes with it, low-income countries would have to spend in 2030 $500 billion in order to deliver on those 5 out of 17 goals. If you include the emerging market economies, you're talking about $2 trillion. What's the point of those numbers? It's to really help everybody realize that it's not going to be a domestic exercise conducted by the countries. It will require partnership, it will require donors' support, it will require aids, it will require private sector involvement, and it will require all of us working together. So the IMF certainly is prepared to do its part and to use its resources to help countries in that direction. The third point that I want to make has to do with women. We have done quite a lot of analytical work and research on those issues. One of our heads of department will be talking about it later on, so I don't want to dwell too much into it. Suffice to say that having more women contributing at all levels of our economy and our political scenes is actually propitious to higher growth. Whether you look at Senegal, an additional 4 percentage points to that economy, or whether you talk about those countries where the contribution and the inclusion of women in the economies are at rock bottom, where you are talking about double-digit additional development in those economies, the contribution of women is precious and should be encouraged by all means. I'm saying that because you are the legislators. And one of the first discriminations against women, which Kristalina and her teams have done massive work on, demonstrates that there is still a lot of ground that you should cover, that you should help women in your countries cover, so that they're not discriminated against, whether it's a matter of running a business, having access to finance, inheriting from the family in the same way as their brothers, and you go on and on and on. There are lots of other ways to also help the contribution of women, one of which is fiscal. And we have seen clear cases where by putting budgetary money on the table, by helping childcare centers, by helping the parents going through that phase and then being able to readjust to the labor market, is actually producing massive output. So that's what I wanted to say this morning, a little bit on the outlook. Delicate moment, unsettled economies, synchronized slowing down, very country-specific policy mix, but a delicate moment. SDGs, a lot of money is going to be needed, great cooperation required, and women, please look at what each and every one of you can actually do to eradicate discriminations that not only are a moral disgrace, but hamper development and the growth of economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madame, for that update and overview. And I want to, on behalf of everyone here, thank the IMF and the World Bank Group for your support of the Parliamentary Network. As we talk about transparency and accountability for parliamentarians from around the world, your support for our continuing work is very much appreciated and indeed makes this event today happen. Madame, from the World Bank, the interim president. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Percy, and a very good morning to all of you. It is an incredible privilege to have been the interim president for the bank over the last months, creating this rare historic opportunity for the two Bretton Woods institutions to look like the table over there to be run by women. I want to talk about three things. One, the status of the World Bank Group. Two, what are our core priorities and why? And three, make a big plea for IDA. So, the status of the World Bank Group. I'm very proud with what we have earned as trust of our shareholders. Today, we are in the best financial position we have ever been in our history. We have received a 50% increase of our financial capacity in IBRD and IFC through a historic capital increase, $13 billion paid in capital. Our fund for the poor, IDA, is the largest it has ever been, and it is very modern. We have 75 billion over 3 years. Our guarantee agency, MIGA, is doing almost twice as much as it has been doing just a couple of years, 4 years ago. To put it very simply, we have a firing power of $100 billion a year between now and 2030, and we certainly need it. And as I'm sure you have learned, we now have our new president, David Malpass. He was the US senior official who made our capital increase possible. And I can tell you that he's strongly committed to work where it is most needed, in the countries that rely on support the most. So to sum it up, we are fighting fit, and we are determined to do our best in the countries we serve. And it is paramount that we do it, because what we recognize is tremendous need, as Christine talked about, in terms of supporting countries to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. I want to focus on the goal that is, for a reason, number one: ending extreme poverty. We can be proud as a world community of having gone a very long way in the right direction. In 1990, there were 1.1 billion more people in extreme poverty. Extreme poverty was 36% of the population. In 2015, it dropped to 10%, and we calculate that today it is slightly over 8%. This is tremendous. But if you're one of the nearly 700 million people that are still living in extreme poverty today, this success means nothing to you. And what we face as a global community is the speed with which poverty reduction has been happening in the last decades is no more. We're slowing down. And more dramatically, in a number of countries, poverty is going in the wrong direction. It is going up, not down. So if by 2030, we expect the world to be, in average, with 2% of the population living in extreme poverty outside of Africa, in Africa, we would be somewhere between 25 and 30%. So behind this average of poverty down to at least 6% by 2030, which is what we calculate with the fund, we have a very, very big difference between those who succeed and those who have not yet gotten there. My professor of statistics used to say about averages, you can put your head in the refrigerator, your feet in the oven, your temperature would be average, but you will be dead. And I can tell you that for us at the World Bank, it is absolutely not acceptable that we would see some countries in 2030 still being in the higher ranges. Let me finish with one example that is illustrating the challenge we face very clearly. Today, 50% of poor people live in 5 countries: India, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, DRC, Nigeria. 5 countries. By 2030, India and Bangladesh are likely to meet the the Sustainable Development Goal of 3%. They're likely to be around that level. Ethiopia will see an improvement, but Nigeria and DRC would see poverty going up. And so will a number of countries in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, countries affected by conflicts like Yemen or Syria. unless we focus our attention and resources where it matters the most. And that takes me to my second point, our priorities. Clearly, on the background of what I just said, our top priority is to move more resources, financial resources, and our own staff in countries affected by conflicts and fragility. We have already doubled funding for fragile states from $7 to $14 billion under IDA 18, under the current IDA. And we have been moving our staff to be based where it matters the most. And I can tell you, it makes a difference. For example, we have a private sector investment in Afghanistan in resins that would have not happened if we didn't have people in Afghanistan making sure private sector comes in. And when we talk about fragility, we are particularly clear that fragility has other causes. Christine talked about climate change. Climate change is already affecting countries, and unfortunately, the most vulnerable are countries that have done very little, close to nothing, to cause this problem. Africa, in its totality, contributes 4% of CO2 emissions, but 65% of the African population already experiences the impact of droughts, floods, cyclones, hurricanes. Just right now, I don't know whether we have people here from Mozambique or Malawi or Zimbabwe, 3 countries that have been so dramatically impacted by cyclone Ikai. We have made a commitment as an institution to double our investment in climate action. We will, over the next 5 years, invest 200 billion, 100 billion from our public sector arms, 100 billion from private sector and private mobilization. But what I take pride of is that our public investment, the 100 billion I am responsible for, will go on equal footing for mitigation and for adaptation. We are the first institution to place adaptation to climate change at par with action to reduce emissions because of the vulnerability of countries. We will see by 2030 100 million more in extreme poverty in poor countries because of climate change. We would see 143 million climate refugees by 2050 unless we act. Our third priority is one that I know is very dear to the parliamentarians, and it is focus on jobs. And we see that paramount for success in turning around the fate of countries. And in that regard, we are clearly committed to 3 avenues of action. One, invest in people. We now have our human capital project. 57 countries volunteer to be early adopters. It is about turning education and health from expenditures to investments, turning our minds how we assess those. Because people form 2/3 of the wealth of nations. And guess what? Richer countries have a higher share, 70% or more. Poorer countries have lower share, 40% or less. We want countries to be prosperous. We have to invest in people, in the right skills and capabilities, especially for the youth. Secondly, well, if you have people with skills but you don't have jobs, ain't gonna make a difference. So our second avenue is to support especially private sector, and that means investment climate, good fiscal policies, good monetary policies, and we of course join forces with the fund in that regard. And just one example, we have this compact with Africa. with the Fund and African Development Bank, we are supporting countries in it. What we have seen is taking very massive policy action, some 100+ reforms, have led to the compact countries having 36% increase in private sector investments. And this is what we want to see, more of it. And last but not least, and this is actually the fun part of my job, I can tell you, we are absolutely determined to be an engine for the countries, especially in Africa, to catch up with the digital economy. And that means access to internet, it means digital ID, it means e-commerce, it means e-government. We are determined to see Africa by 2030 having 100% access to the internet for people, for businesses, for governments. Today it is 24%. And one might say, well, is that really possible? I'll tell you, of course, if we are determined, if we concentrate, it is possible. It would cost money, it would cost political will. It's about 80 to 100 billion price tag. It would require you, the parliamentarians in Africa, to demand it and to insist on it, but of course it is possible. I'm a Bulgarian. My country in the late 80s was on the other side of the Iron Curtain. And in these days, nobody in my country would have thought that we would be a member of the European Union and we would quadruple our income per capita. It is possible. So my wish for us as a community is to keep our eyes on these very big tasks. And I would do no service to women if I don't say, Christine is absolutely right. If we are to succeed, we have to tap into the potential of all people, men and women. Today, in an average economy, remember my average story? In an average economy, a woman has only 3/4 of the legal rights of a man. How could that be good for us? And you can change that. Let me finish with my third point, and this is my plea to you. I wholeheartedly beg you, those who are donors, those who are recipients of IDA, of International Development Association funds, please help us to make IDA 19 by the end of this year the most successful IDA replenishment there could be. Please. Thank you.
Colleagues, I want to thank the two speakers, and we'll go to questions. But before we go to questions, there's a long tradition that the moderator gets to ask the first two questions. And I must say I'm delighted. Having attended these meetings for years, I never got a question. But I'll keep them short. And I urge, when you have your opportunity, to keep the questions short so we can get as many in as possible. My first question is, all countries have a problem with corruption. In Canada, for example, overseas tax evasion has been a burning issue, costing us hundreds of millions of dollars. We have corporations paying bribes overseas to do business. I'm wondering if the IMF has or will be calculating the cost of corruption and measures to fight it. And I'll ask my second question at the same time, and that's on the point we talked about, youth engagement and youth employment. What initiatives will the World Bank Group be doing in that end?
Well, thank you, Percy. That's a really important question, because the fight against corruption is certainly one of the areas where the IMF will be more active than it was before. And I'm delighted that the board of the IMF unanimously supported this determination. You are correct in saying that all are concerned and involved, if only because for corruption to take place, it requires two parties, one that gives or one that requests, and one that receives or one that grants. So all in all, everybody is concerned. And when you look at how it weakens growth, when you look at how it reduces the legitimate revenues that a country should have in order to finance hospitals, roads, schools, health and education in general for its people and for its youth in particular, it's a matter that really should concern us all, and that certainly we at the IMF are concerned about. You are right to relate it to the issue of taxation, and I think we can also go one further step in relating it to the anti-money laundering and the fight against the financing of terrorism, because all of that eventually comes together. And it is that those non-transparent transactions, that grey or dark money that moves around, that actually fuels other matters that we are very concerned about, which is the money laundering, which is the financing of terrorism, which is tax evasion and erosion of base, which, and I'll just leave one number with you, it's more related to tax than it is to corruption, but as I said, all of that is closely interlinked. Low-income countries leave on the table over $200 billion of tax that they should legitimately collect because of base erosion, profit optimization of some sort that should be avoided if people are genuine in wanting to invest in schools, hospitals and roads. And I'm only restricting to these three because they're critically important for the development and the well-being of people. Good. So, to you members of Parliament, please support us. Please encourage us. Please help us with the authorities of your respective countries. We all have a stake in this endeavor. And the sunshine is the best disinfectant, as all of us know. Transparency and light are helpful.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, and it is truly the question that we need to crack if we want to see prosperity tomorrow. Make sure that young people are skilled and have jobs. Today we have 620 million young people out of training, out of education, out of employment. This is like a ticking bomb. And unless we do something about it, there would be not only misery and disappointment and anxiety for these young people, but we would undermine security for all. So what is the bank doing? We're doing a lot, but I would focus on three things. One, we are working very hard on determining how we can bridge with the future of work the understanding and our programs in that direction. We published our 2019 World Development Report on the future of work, and it was centered quite a lot on that question: where are the jobs of tomorrow, and how we make sure that young people get there. And of course, it gets into the details of what kinds of skills need to be nourished. And it has a more of optimistic undertone than usually when people talk about that. Basically says the new economy is generating a lot as new jobs. The new climate economy is generating new jobs. The disruptive technologies are generating new jobs. The issue is make sure that young people everywhere can benefit from that. And on that note, we are very keen to marshal with this human capital project I mentioned. This is the second thing we do. We are revamping how we work, and we are also engaging with countries on how they work, making sure that there is whole of government approach when we talk about skills and youth employment, rather than making it the job of a single employment agency. It has to be everybody's business, and the same way it has to be everybody's business for us at the bank. And of course it gets very, very directly into cutting red tape so private sector, especially SMEs, can create the jobs that are necessary. And Christine somewhat, she touched upon that topic. It is not a brain surgery, but for many years we have been a bit slow on the uptake when it comes down to that topic. We were very focused on making sure kids are in school. Well, they're in school, but they don't learn. We now calculate the distance between schooling and learning, and in my country it is almost 2 years. In other words, kids are in school for 12 years, but they learn the equivalent of 10. In some developing countries, the distance is 5, 6, 7 years. So we have to concentrate on learning and not so much on schooling. And that means a very, very different attention to professionalizing teachers, connecting this to reality, connecting youth to jobs. The third thing is financing projects that empower young people. And that is really cool. We are supporting what is called popularly iHubs, places where young people can come together to support each other as entrepreneurs. Now in Africa there are some 450 of these centers. We have been driving that very strongly. If you ever are in one of, if you are from the continent, go and visit one of those. It gives you so much hope for the future when you are with these young people. And then we provide financial resources so they can actually start their own businesses. They would get help on managing these businesses. And then, of course, when they reach certain level, to scale up these businesses. So in a nutshell, and today at the World Bank, any place you turn, you would see somebody talking about jobs and economic transformation. That's the new buzz of the group, for the sake of young people.
Okay, we have questions now, and we have a long list here, and that has just been handed to me. These are, Georgiana, these are people who had their hands up. Okay, did we get all the rooms? We're not going to get everybody, unfortunately, on the list. We'll start with Egypt. As a Canadian Liberal, I'm starting on my left. I'll move the center and then the right. Egypt.
Thank you very much. Greetings from the women's table to the women-dominated panel. My question is about the budgeting sensitive, gender-sensitive budgeting. And my question is, what are the main pillars for the success of the beginning of the gender-sensitive budgeting in a developing country, in your opinion? Thank you.
Yeah. We take several questions? Or
yes, we're taking three at once. Go ahead. And then sorry.
Thank you. To remain in the same context, institutions and countries with more women's participation and leadership in political parties, civil society, tend to be more inclusive, responsive, and egalitarian. Do you think that equal inheritance and empowering women to entrepreneurship by the access to the land can reduce informal economy of women in developing countries and give more digital potential development? Thank you.
And the last question this round will be Ukraine.
Thank you. Madam Lagarde, in your speech you made a priority of gender issue. For a country like Ukraine, here I am, yes. For a country like Ukraine, some of the changes we made into our legislation was only possible because your personal and direct institutional support. Speaking of anti-corruption agenda, you encouraged us to make changes in legislation for gender issue equality. Let me ask you, are you ready to make prior actions such laws in your agenda, because I totally agree with you. Women participation in economy should be celebrated and supported by legislators. But there is huge opposition to this issue, be it quotas in politics, quotas for SOE, corporate governance. We have opposition, and we are minority in our parliaments. Are you ready to support us? Thank you.
Okay, shall I have a go? On gender budgeting, really important question, and clearly one area where we do a lot of technical assistance, where we are on the ground with countries to help them devise what is going to be good gender budgeting. I'll give you an example in the case of Egypt that crosses my mind, and it indicates what is gender budgeting. It's not about having a minister of women's rights or a particular division with the prime minister or in the government that is going to look at how much budget there is that is spent on women's issues. No. It's a matter of having each and every minister in the entire government, okay, the entire government, from infrastructure to agriculture to homeland security, actually focus and identifying in which way budget requests or particular projects are going to support the inclusion and the contribution of women. One practical example, for instance, that I think applies in Egypt but many other countries as well, is the issue of transportation. How will the transportation budget be organized in such a way that transportation is made safer for women who go from home to work? That's an example of gender budgeting with a particular case. On the issue that you raised, it's not concerning Tunisia, but I know where it's coming from. I think it's critically important that equal inheritance provisions actually empower women and gives them the access to collaterals that they will be able to use when they seek financing, for example. And I think in that vein, it does reduce informality. Because if you can actually have available on your own balance sheet the same assets and the same responsibilities in order to get financing, in order to be empowered to get an apartment, a house, or whatever, then it makes a huge difference and reduces the informality that otherwise will hurt women and will lead to them being exploited. On gender and anti-corruption, I think there is a very, very fascinating link between the two. And whoever is really serious about wanting to defeat corruption will actually enlist women's support. There are studies on that topic. I have seen it for myself. And anybody who is interested in supporting women and encouraging them to join the economy will have an interest in fighting corruption. Because the presence of corruption hurts women more than it does men. I'll give you one example. When the wrong project is eventually financed through funny systems and circles, where part of the money finds its way somewhere else, generally those projects are not the necessary projects. They are what we call here the white elephant projects. But if the right projects are selected, such as a bridge, such as a road, then the time spent by women and girls to fetch wood, to collect water, is going to be reduced. And those projects have to be managed in a decent and respectful way and in a transparent fashion. So I think I see the two as very closely interlinked. As you know, the fight against corruption in Ukraine, for instance, and the institutions that we have insisted be actually delivered by the legislator. Thank you very much. If we helped you, you helped your country big way. Well, clearly it has to, number one, be made sustainable. And as I said, women and corruption, very close link between the two. Anybody serious about corruption has to be serious about women. So whether it's prior action, whether it is structural benchmark, whatever, it has to be part of the story.
I'm just going to add one point. We
have been assessing legal rights of women systematically over a decade, and we've published recently a report called 10 Years of Reforms. It is Women, Business, and the Law. And what it does, it tracks progress in all areas, including inheritance laws for women in different countries and different parts of the world. What it shows is that when there is progress in that area, there is progress in practically every other area, exactly for the reason Christine explained. When women have rights of assets, they can participate in the economy, they benefit, everybody benefits. Before you leave as parliamentarians, I would make sure that you all get a copy of Women, Business in the Law and the Law. You can see where your country is, how it ranks. You can take it home and have a program, legislative program of action. Today there are only 6 countries where there are no legal obstacles at all to women. Doesn't mean women there are fully equal, but at least the law is not on the way. But we need more, many more. Middle East and North Africa, the region you come from, has started picking up momentum, but it is still way under. If in an average economy a woman has 3/4 of the rights of a man, in your part of the world it is still less than half. The good news is that everywhere I go in the region I see appetite for change, and it is driven by a simple thing: economic interest. You get women to work, good things happen. In my country we say, you want something discussed, call the men. You want something done, grab the women.
Thank you. The next question from the United States. The United States? They're here. Yes. go ahead.
In talking about women, one of the, and climate change, one of the things that we've been working on in the bank has been really focused on is doing something about child malnutrition, stunting, and not only the personal tragedy to the child, but the loss to the country as well. What should we be doing more with climate change and with some of the advances, and the United States has been involved under President Obama with Feed the Future to get more women involved in better sustainable agriculture and also agro-business. So that's something that there's been investments put in. It has dividends that will come forward, but climate change is going to be a big part of it. But for the record, I'm from the US, and climate change is a real and present danger.
Thank you. Next question is from Portugal.
Thank you, Percy. And thank you both for your leadership. I think it's your strong leadership and successful leadership is probably the most effective way to move the agenda, the gender agenda forward. I can't, coming from Portugal, I'm tempted with Madame Lagarde in the room, having been part of the majority that actually took the country out of the mud following the bailout. Some years have passed. Have you looked back at what happened in Portugal and other countries where the IMF had to intervene? And now that the clouds are in the horizon, using your words, what lessons have we learned for the near future? And the second question for both of you is on global health. We just had a presentation before from Ida. Global health is not a top priority. And the truth is, health, we know, is instrumental in ensuring social justice. It is instrumental in ending poverty. Women are the main victims of poor health around the world. How can we get global health with a stronger presence within the international development agenda? Thank you.
Thank you. Kosovo, next question.
Thank you. I'm going to stay on the same, over here. On the same topic, Madame Lagarde and Ms. Georgieva rightly pointed out how not including women in the working market actually is, it hampers development. So we've heard so many times over the years that investing in equality, in gender equality, is not only the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do. My question is, after so much investment from both your organizations and so many of us being so loud about how important this is, why aren't countries acting smart? Why is practice and looking at the reality in the ground still showing such a high inactivity rate among women, which means countries are losing so much money, so much development, and still, despite of good legislation, we were talking about this in the morning, and the Women, Business and the Law report, and in countries like mine, we're doing really well in that report, but then in practice we see a completely different reality on the percentage of inheritance of property, access to justice, and so on and so forth. So from your practice, working with countries individually, why isn't all of this good advice being taken? Why isn't it happening despite of it being the right path and the smart thing to do? Thank you.
Yes. Colleagues, our very busy guests have to leave at 10, and almost everybody in the room wants a question. It's going to be impossible, but Gurgana, if you could wave. We'll take your questions, or you can email them to us and we'll get answers back to you. But it's an impossible position. I have pages of names here, but we'll try to answer these questions in the next 10 minutes. Colleagues.
So, very good question on how is climate change going to affect the fight against malnutrition. What we are seeing already is that in parts of the world that are at highest risk, especially droughts, they are 4 times more damaging than floods in terms of food security, but also floods and hurricanes. Not only that pushes back agricultural yield, but our research shows it is the girls that are most severely impacted. And when a girl is malnourished, she gives birth usually to children that are already suffering the consequences of it, and we have this down spiral. So what are the actions? One, we are very concentrated on targeting the most vulnerable, having good forecast when a drought or a flood hits, who is going to be impacted, and how we can use social safety nets to expand rapidly and provide relief to those that are impacted. But then too, and that is where it is actually a positive story, how we can turn adaptation to climate change into a plus for development by having drought resilient seeds, more effective use of water, better agricultural practices to actually build up yields. A very interesting fact, Bill Gates has never ever agreed to be a member of any commission until now. He, together with Ban Ki-moon and myself, co-chairs the Global Adaptation Commission with focus on food security and agricultural productivity. So there are things that can be done. What you are telling us is absolutely right. Focus on the most vulnerable, those who are least likely to have their voices heard. And that's what our targeting support does. Just to say on global health, universal health coverage. This is where we have to all go. Period. I don't think I need to elaborate more on that. And on the last question, why is it not happening? Well, there is a very good saying that the most common thing about common sense, not very common. We tend to, as human race, we tend to be slow on the uptake, but we are on the uptake. In every country I go, I now see much more attention to gender equality as good economics. So we are eroding the resistance. It would take time. There are cultural norms. It's not just the law. We change the law, but then society has to adapt it. And to the women in this audience, it also depends a lot on us. We very often talk about he for she. I, for one, am a big proponent of she for she. Not going to quote Albright. Do you know the quote from Mrs. Albright on that particular issue? Yeah. How many know it? All the women in the audience. Yeah. Do the men know it? Well, Mrs. Albright says there is a special place in hell for women who do not help other women.
You know what, I'm just going to pick up on that, because as much as there should be a he for she and a she for she, I think there should also be a she for he.
True.
And I will.
True. Yep.
Okay, now pay attention for a second. I will. Can you just hold everything for a second? For all those of you who share meetings, and I'm sure you do, commissions, groups, whatever, be very attentive in the next few weeks and months. Very often, when a woman takes the floor and begins making a point or raising an argument, look around the room. Men start chatting, looking at their emails, and are not paying attention. So, I promise you it is the case. You know, I have 30 years of sharing meetings of all sorts. Private sector, public sector, Minister of Finance, blah, 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 blah. It's always the case. So, it's something in our head that we need to turn, which is why I'm coming to my point. She for he. And I'll tell you why. Because I had the same annoyance with this. It makes economic sense. It's good for the private sector. Many studies demonstrate it. It's good for politics. It's good for the fight against corruption. It's good for growth. Why aren't we doing it? So I ask my teams, please dig into that and see whether actually bringing women to the economy hurts the incumbents, those who have their jobs, those who are running the show. Because then there would be a case, you know, if men feel that their jobs will be taken away, they could resent it. If you study hard, particularly in those markets where women's access to the job market or women's contribution to the economy is particularly low, simply as a result of the fact that women bring something different, men bring something different. We are different. Mm-hmm. And we bring a diversity that is richer than a single contribution on one side. By the mere fact that we are bringing these contributions together, we increase the productivity. What happens when you increase productivity in any normally constituted enterprise or society? The factors of production receive something. And when you're talking about the labor factor of production, you're talking about the employees. Who receives? All of them, men and women. So if you bring women to the market when they were not very present, by virtue of that diversity principle, you increase productivity. If you increase productivity, the fruits of productivity are going to be reallocated to the factors of the economy, including labor, which comprises men and women. So she for he actually puts more bread on the table of men. It works.
And if I may, by the sheer fact we have Christine Lagarde to lead the IMF, gender equality in the world has advanced.
Now, I want to go to your Portugal question, because I think it's a really important one. Portugal was a country that, at the time of the financial crisis, was in real trouble. Came the European sovereign debt crisis, even more trouble. And it is now thriving, in terms of growth improvement, in terms of employment improvement, in terms of destination for investment. It is doing fantastically well. Now, why is that? I think it's been a combination of various things. One is we partnered together. But in Portugal, you demonstrated something that is precious. and it is that across party lines, you decided to have full ownership together of the hard stuff that had to be done on the Portuguese economy. And the opposition at the time actually signed a letter confirming that they would support the program, comes what may, notwithstanding elections that were coming up. The fact that you had national ownership of the measures that had to be taken, I think, made a huge difference. Now, there is still work to be done, and clearly, for instance, the banking sector needs to continue to be properly organized, and discipline needs to be continued on the fiscal front. Structural reforms have to continue as well, so it's not as if it was all done and you can go back to business as usual, but frankly, it has been a program where success was really a very nicely owned endeavor on the part of the entire Portugal.
Colleagues, on your behalf, I'd like to thank our very busy guests for taking time out of their schedule to come here today and to speak to us and to answer questions. And as we said, we're available for other questions to get answers back to you. Again, Madame.
And we will give the answers, it's promised.
Exactly. And or save them for next year, a reason to come back next year and ask them. I got my chance to ask my question this year after 4 years, so there's hope for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's better to send to email.
Yeah, or WhatsApp.
What do you?
WhatsApp.
WhatsApp. Yeah.